Staff Sergeant Albert R. Panebianco, United States Army, World War II, folks. Another one of my great, precious World War II stories. And if you've been following my work, you know this is where I started my work, was with the World War II veterans over 22 years ago now. And so this is the first love of my work. So these World War II veterans are close to my heart. I've lost most of them, so their stories are extra important. But I was fortunate to meet Al. It was in Durham, North Carolina. I was on a 10-day tour back east in 2008. September 10th, 2008, I interviewed him, and he told me a great story. Drafted in 1943, ended up in Europe, fighting in Europe. Started as a clerk typist, ended as a rifleman, became a staff sergeant through his combat experience, and very, very well told story through his eyes and ears. He was 85 when I interviewed him, passed away 16 months later at the age of 87 in January of 2010. He's been gone now over 15 years. But again, one of my heroes of heroes. I love this man as he tells his story. He fought in Anzio, Sicily. He was with the 45th Division, which was the 157th Infantry Regiment of the 45th Division, Company K. And like I said, he was a staff sergeant. Anzio, Sicily, received a Purple Heart for wounds in action, and also a combat infantry badge. The 45th Infantry Division was very well known in Europe in World War II. They were made up of National Guardsmen from Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And their motto was Thunderbird, so they were the Thunderbird Division, and their motto was always forward. I like that. I just like that. On April 29th, 1945, the 45th Infantry Division went into the Dachau concentration camp. And I've done a film on the Holocaust, so Al is featured in that film. And they liberated 32,000 prisoners, folks. Many, many were killed, but they did liberate 32,000 prisoners. And Al tells the story in my Holocaust film. He's also featured in my film Battle of the Bulge, so he's out there. His story's going. And but the concentration camps, just again, those stories are close to my heart. I've done a 2.5-hour film called Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembered, folks. If you want to hear a story, this is history. I hope you will stop and listen to these. I know a lot of you watch the Vietnam stories, which I do too, love them all. But you got to watch these World War II stories. That's why we had our Vietnam veterans and what we have today in our country, the freedoms that we have. So, amen. Okay, God bless you guys. Thank you for watching and listening to these stories. I want to thank Sean Johnson. Sean's been a supporter of my work, and he makes it possible for me to bring stories like Al to you today. So Sean, again, a great big thank you and a hug to you, sir, for supporting this work and believing in what I'm doing and our veterans and our country. A patriot. Sean, you're a patriot. Hope to shake your hand one day. But I wanted to thank you again, sir. I really appreciate you. God bless you, Sean. Thank you for sharing these stories, folks. Let's get them into the hands of our young people. Voices of History Radio is still on the air. Hopefully it'll go into its 3rd year next month. And if you'd like to get involved with this work, you can do so through this video or through my website, larrycappetto.com. And to share these videos, and I appreciate you so much for watching. And let's honor Al, Staff Sergeant Albert R. Panebianco, a good Italian name like Cappetto. And I'll talk to you next time.
'85.
And what year did you go into the military?
March the 11th, 1943.
And how old were you then? I'm not good at math.
19.
Okay. Did you join or were you drafted?
No, I was drafted.
Can you tell me, do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor was attacked and how you heard the information?
Yes. I was, believe it or not, washing my brother's car when that news came over the radio. And that's what I remember doing at that time.
Do you remember how you felt, or?
I believed that the war was going to be over before they got to me, you know. But it didn't turn out that way. I was drafted shortly thereafter, you know.
Did you feel that sense of call to duty like a lot of young men felt to fight for your country?
Honestly, I guess I can say yes in a way, because we just felt that the way things were going, somebody had to stop not only the Germans but the Japs too. So,
Where did you go to basic training?
I went to basic training at Camp Wheeler, Georgia.
And you're, okay, go ahead.
And I was assigned to a clerk's and stenographer school. And at that time, they only had 13 weeks of basic. And so we had about 4 weeks of close order drill and weapons and so forth. And then the other 9 weeks were typing and clerical bits, which came in very handy a little later on.
What was your MOS, your job in the military?
My MOS at that time was a 405, which was a clerk typist. And I was discharged with a 745, which is a rifleman.
So, Al, tell me when you went to Europe. Was it in 44?
No, wait a minute.
You went in 43.
It had to be 43.
You went over in 43?
Yeah, January of 43. And we went on a ship that, it was a second trip over, was the Horace Mann. And it transported about 5,000 troops. And it was, they didn't use an escort for it because it was too fast. It was built in Kearney, New Jersey, and this was their second trip over. They brought back a load of wounded, and then we were on the second trip over to Casablanca. That's where we landed, in Casablanca. And then we stayed in Casablanca for a short period of time, and the next thing, we got on the 40 and 8 freight cars, where there was standing room only, and they took us across to Oran. And then after that, we were, they shipped us again to Naples, Italy. And from Naples then, they put us on an LST to Anzio beachhead. And that's the first time I experienced shelling, was there, because the Germans had the port also zeroed in. And we got off the ship with a loaded duffel bag, and there was nobody there to greet us or say, go that way or this way. And as a consequence, we all decided to shed the duffel bags and lug them, because we didn't even know where we were going or how far it was. So the next thing I knew, they took us to a place and they kept us there till dark. And then about, I guess it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, they had assigned us to different companies. Now, at this particular time on Anzio, you got to realize that the Germans, if they had just gone a day more, would have washed our American troops into the Tyrrhenian Sea. And this is why they were in such a hurry to get, so most of that 5,000, most of the 5,000 men on that ship were assigned at random regardless whether you were a cook, whether you were a clerk, you were an artificer, no matter what you were assigned to a rifle company. And I happened to be assigned, must have been 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, to Company K, 157th Regiment, the 45th Division. And I said to myself, God, why me, God, why me? And because I knew what I was in for, being on Anzio. And so it was an experience on Anzio. We did nothing during daylight hours. Everything had to be done in darkness. When the night fell, that's when. And the Germans used to send a Piper Cub, we used to call them Midnight Charlie, I think it was. Midnight Charlie used to come. Now, you could have touched this plane. If you took your rifle and put your arm up, you could have touched, or you could have shot him out of the sky. But we were told, do not, just ignore it, and don't do anything to give away our positions. So they had 2 pieces of artillery that were exceptional on the railroad. And one was called Robert, the other was Leopold. They were big guns, and they had that whole thing just zeroed in. And when our Air Force were looking for it, they couldn't locate these guns because these guns were on the railroad track and would be brought back in to like a mountain effect. And so you couldn't see them from the air. But they did a fantastic job. And that's why those big guns, I mean, could go way beyond the beachhead. You know?
When you landed on Anzio, was it uneventful, or were they shooting at you?
No, it was uneventful. They weren't shooting at us because our troops were already on the beach. It was, Anzio was like a summer resort here, like the Outer Banks here, or I could say Wildwood, New Jersey, and it was really a vacation place.
What was our objective landing at Anzio? What were we trying to do?
Oh, they were trying to cut off, let me see, was it the Gustav line, I think. They were having trouble trying to pass the Gustav line. And they thought that perhaps taking troops and taking them by ship to Anzio, they would be able to cut off the German troops that would try to be escaping to the north from the Gustav line. And that's what they were trying to do. It didn't work out that way at all. It didn't work that way at all because General Mark Clark, who was the general at the time, didn't do what he was supposed to do. You know, there's many, many blunders during wars. And this was a blunder. This was a blunder. He was supposed to go up into the Apennine Mountains and cut off any Germans who were coming up from the south and capture them. He was more interested in being the first person to enter Rome, because that's where we were headed, for Rome. Well, he accomplished that feat, but on the other hand, he risked a lot of lives, and there were a lot of men killed for that. In fact, after we reached Rome, we came back, but then Senator Dole was one of the divisions where he was seriously wounded in the Po Valley. Well, God knows how many more casualties there were that these Germans were able to escape and fight on up in the Po Valley. See? So, but I could remember that on push-off day, which was May 23rd, 1944, I believe it was. It was an eventful day. On my website, I say it was just like a movie. There were tanks and planes and machine guns, you name it, mortars, all firing at the one time. And I could recall that our position on Anzio, while we were at a stalemate, we were at a stalemate in Anzio from the latter part of February to May 23rd. I'd like to make an analogy, I don't know if it's a good one or not, that it made me feel like I was a cockroach or a spider trapped in a bathtub, because they looked down, they were in the mountains and we were on the flats. And they could see, that's why we dare not move during daylight hours. That's why everything had to be done at nighttime. But I can remember on push-off, I had a squad of men with 60 millimeter mortars, and of course you had to have some kind of a recess or ravine or a shell hole that you could put your mortar in. Well, unfortunately we couldn't find anything, so we did find a ravine, which now we're stuck out in no man's land. We're ahead of the company, and we're down. The only thing that separates us from the Germans was coiled wire. That's it. And I'll tell you, you pull guard duty, 2 on, 2 off, which means you sleep 2 and you're awake 2 for guard duty. You imagine you're hearing everything. Something's moving out there all the time. And so, but we didn't want to fire. But I did find out on push-off day, in that ravine, it surprised me. On left were Germans facing this way. Then we came along, Americans facing that way, and then British on the right of us facing that way. We didn't know it all the time we were in that ravine, believe it or not. So I remember push-off day, the Germans had it pretty well zeroed in, and the division paid a price. They really did. And they started to throw artillery. And myself and 2 other men dove into a large artillery hole. And when it all quieted down, and I got up, and I was in the middle of them, I got up, these 2 men, stone dead. Me, not a scratch. And that's when the day I began to believe. Believe me, it doesn't take long. And when something like that happens, you see 2 dead men beside you. And one of those men, we did go back to Europe twice, and one of those men is buried in the American cemetery in Nettuno. Nice fellow.
Allow me to jump a little bit
Go
ahead
ahead.
now,
Go
because
ahead.
of time's sake.
Go ahead.
I want you to tell me about your involvement at the Battle of the Bulge. Tell me give me an overview of the Battle of the Bulge and then your involvement.
Well, the Battle of the Bulge, as I knew, we were not involved in the Battle of the Bulge because we were to the left of Bastogne. Although we were involved in the second Battle of the Bulge. There's a book written by Charles Whiting who talks about that. It says it's unrecorded. And there were many men killed in that battle because it was when Hitler decided, with all his armor, his tanks and what have you, that he wasn't going to make it through the Ardennes forest. He decided he was going to sweep around, and there was an 84-mile line. And we were one of the divisions that were protecting a part of that line. And that's when we got involved at Rippetsweiler. We were already in Germany, believe it or not, but we had to pull out, and none of us liked to pull back, you know. You shed blood, and a lot of guys killed and this and that, and now we got to pull back. Why? So Rippetsweiler in France was the town that we were going to. Now the 70th Infantry Division was involved there too. And in Rippetsweiler, it was a very, very bad experience, very bad. We came back, and on the 14th of January of 45, we pushed off a dense forestry and where we were. And we were then fighting, we found out, the 6th Nord Division, N-O-R-D. And these boys were fighters, there was no doubt about it. Well, the second day, we made our objective. We got there. And then all hell broke loose. On the January 20th, 6 companies were captured. They could have been wounded, they could have been dead, or they could have been in A1 condition at the time, but there were 600 men taken. So our whole battalion went. And they took them prisoner, and then I was hit on the 15th. There's an old slogan about the $1 million wound. Well, mine was I felt was a $1 million wound. I was hit in the mouth, had some teeth taken, and I was able to go back to Epinal, France, which at that time was about 100 miles, I think, from Rippetsweiler. And I'll tell you, I felt so good after spending a year in foxholes out in the field. The only time we got any relief is when they called us in for a rest period, which was 2 or 3 days. And I could hear it was frigid, it was cold, snowy, and I could hear the wind howling. Little did I ever know that what I just explained to you was going to transpire, but it did. But hadn't I been hit, I would have been in with that group. So I thank God, talk about believing again, having faith. Step 2. So at the hospital, like I say, the major came up and gave me a Purple Heart. And the poor kid, I was just explaining to the fellow out there, this poor kid that they brought in, they were training with our troops in a minefield and didn't know it. This poor kid stepped on a mine, goodbye eyes. And I'll never forget that kid. But after that, did you want to say something?
Well, the Battle of the Bulge, now you mentioned the second Battle of the Bulge, but so you weren't in the main fighting of the...
In Bastogne?
Yeah. Well, no, not just Bastogne, but just the whole... Are you aware of the push of the Germans in the line to go to Antwerp and all that?
Oh, yes.
Well, give me the historical perspective of that.
Well, we knew that Hitler, that was his last and main stand. And he was hoping that he would make it. But and he put a lot of tanks and what have you, name it, he put it in there. But you know what? He didn't make it. And this is what brought his turn to go and try to break into the line, I could say left of that, where I tell you these 6 or 8 divisions were chosen to hold it. Now that's where we came in Rippetsweiler. But like I tell you, we didn't hold because we were all captured, that they were all captured rather.
But Al, tell me a little bit about whether you were directly involved or not, but tell me about the combat, maybe some of the battles, and then the weather conditions of the Battle of the Bulge.
Well, at that time it was cold, there was no doubt about it. you know. In fact, I just looked at a film yesterday, Bands of Brothers, and they really had a tough time. And one of the fellows in the 101st happened to graduate from the same high school I did, Bill Guarneri. And I never met him personally, but I did write to him, email him and what have you. But as far as the experience or combat of the Battle of the Bulge was what transpired. They just shelled us. Now, there were a couple men alive, and Lieutenant Colonel Felix L. Sparks was our battalion commander, and they told him, one of the fellows came back and told him what was transpiring, and he got in a tank and went up there and was able to bring a few of the fellows back. There is now a book that was written that this German by the name, I think it's Voss, V-O-S-S, who wrote this book and remembers that incident and would not fire on Sparks. He could have killed him outright. He decided, now they have a book out on that particular incident. So that was another thing. And I may add, Sparks, in my opinion, was one of the greatest combat officers that I ever met. And I was under his command for a long time, from Anzio to Dachau, or Munich,
So how did you come back? Because you went to Dachau, right?
Yes.
I want to talk about that now, but you were wounded, then you came back online?
Oh, yes. I should have told you about that. I was in the hospital for a month, and they sent me back without my teeth. I guess they figured, hey, why go through the expense giving him a new teeth? He's liable to get in there and be killed the next day. So we'll wait till after the war to give him his teeth. Well, that was all right. But we were being reorganized because, like I say, because everybody was captured. And they were drawing officers and enlisted men from all different outfits to build up our 157th Regiment again. And also, we were so short of men at that particular time that they started to draw, I think it was 10%, of rear echelon men. Now, these guys were over there 4 years, 5 years, and they didn't like the idea that they were, being drafted to be on the front line. And at that time also, when they reorganized, they changed the 60mm mortar. They took that away, and they replaced it with bazookas. Now I'm a bazooka squad leader, right? Yeah, right.
Here's what I want to start talking about now. I want to start talking about Dachau and you going into the concentration camps. So let's talk to me a little bit about that.
All right, let me, to this very day, there's a controversy going on between two divisions. In fact, it's so bad that it has passed down from generation to generation now, that the kids have, it was between the 42nd and the 45th Division. It so happened on April 28th, Felix Sparks gets orders from regiment that you're going to lead an attack, but there's a possibility you may run into a concentration camp. Sparks doesn't know even none of us knew what a concentration camp was. Well, in our battalion, there was K Company, of which I was with, and then there was L Company, and I Company was in reserve. Now, K Company and L Company, we did pretty good. We're now riding on tanks. We're moving so fast and far forward. Now, K Company was on the left of Dachau. And L Company comes up and goes into the town. There's a town of Dachau, a pretty town. And they had to pull I Company from reserve to take the camp. And that's the company that really took the camp. It was I Company. And even to this day, the time of when this transpired, your guess is as good as mine, as far as that's concerned. I have things in here that tell you the time, but it's disputable. It's not, you know. Well, anyway, Sparks wanted all the companies, his 3 companies, back in Dachau that night or at late afternoon. And then we were assigned to other places. Now, the stench, I don't know. And when you look at railroad cars filled with bodies and all dead, skin and bone, that's all, and some out on the track and what have you, it's terrible. So, you know, there's
Keep going. Don't let that distract
okay.
you.
There's lots of criticism about how many SS troopers and other Germans that were killed in Dachau. People don't realize what war really is, and unless you're in it, you know it could send you berserk temporarily. And I know when these guys saw that, because nobody ever experienced anything like that. And how could another human being treat his buddy, his friend, and another human being like they did? I mean, it was unbelievable. And I know some of these fellows were berserk a little after they saw that. So it was nothing for them to take a machine gun or what have you, but Sparks didn't want that to happen. And this fellow was on a machine gun, was a very young boy. And, you know, he was new. And so he killed a few of them, you know, in Dachau. But we weren't there long. We weren't there long. We were in there to do the job and get out. And it's one thing I could say about the 45th Division. If you go to Dachau, you'll see a beautiful plaque for the 42nd Division. You'll see another beautiful plaque for the 20th Armored Division. And guess what? Nothing for the 45th Division. Now, I understand I was hoping to go back to Dachau last year because I was fighting to get a plaque for the 45th, but the 45th, I'm going to tell you, was not an outfit for publicity. All the guys in the 45th, hey, let's fight like hell and get it over with, and let's go home. That's what they were. But there were other outfits that wanted a lot of publicity. Now, the fellow who took the surrender of the Camp Dachau, was a General Henning. I'm trying to think of his first name. It was a General Henning. Now, when Sparks was given the orders to take that camp, he was told, after you take the camp, do not let anybody in or out of that camp until we send our group in to see the lay of the land. Well, there was a news reporter by the name of Marguerite Higgins. I'm just trying to, New York Times, was it? I can't recall. And there was a guy by the name of First, F-U-R-S-T, who was with the Stars and Stripes. She wanted to get this report. She knew about this concentration. She wanted to get a report. Now, nobody could tell me that you make an attack on anything with Jeeps. So there were 6 or 7 Jeeps, and she was part of it, and she had her hair pulled up. She looked like a GI, incognito. Well, anyway, that's how the 42nd got in there. And when Henning wanted to get into the camp. Sparks says, can't do it. My orders are not to let anybody in or out. And that started a ruckus. But the camp was surrendered to General Henning.
Now, you mentioned the box cars with the bodies.
Yeah.
At Dachau, were there incinerators? Were there?
Oh, yes.
You don't have to get really detailed,
No.
but just give me a little overview of what you
yeah.
saw and how this affected you.
Well, there were incinerators that they took the bones of these bodies and just, they had people that just did that, just fed the bodies into the incinerators to burn them up. There was also a gas chamber there. I understood, and many other people understood, that they never used that gas chamber. But other people say they did. It's up in the air. Nobody seems to be able to get a concrete explanation on that thing. But even the wall that they shot, people lined them up against a stone wall and just took them off, took them out of their misery. Yeah.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, you're a young man, you're fighting in the war, and then you see the horrors at the concentration camp. How did you process that information, and did you have faith in God? I mean, how do you put in perspective that part of humanity right there?
I think it was very inhumane for any human being to do that to another human being. It's shocking. And I'll tell you, if you see that, it sets you back. There's no doubt about it. And I was very put out about that, why they would do something like that. You know, the genocide business. It's just unbelievable.
Well, what about Hitler? Did Hitler plan all that and everybody followed his orders? Or how could one man have that all happen?
That's a good question, and it's one that you would have to read the history of Hitler to see how he progressed through his lifetime and how he got to this point. Now, that camp was put into existence in 1933. And it was a munitions place where ammunition was made and stored. And then it was converted over to, and what they had in there were mostly political. The majority of them were Poles, the Polish people. And then there were, I don't know, I'm just trying to think how it lined up, but the Poles had the most in there, and French, you know. But there were priests in there, you know. And it was hellish. There's no doubt about it. It was, and yet, you know, you say to yourself, it's all over, and I'm saying to myself at the end of the war, this is the war to end all wars. You realize it? We've been in a war ever since. Can anybody give me a period of time that we weren't in a war? And we're still in a war. You know? So it doesn't prove anything. Do you think that human beings today would realize what war is really about? Look at all these fellows in Iraq. 4,100 of them. Dead, gone. God only knows how many are wearing prosthesis. Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. But,
well, listen now. There's people. I hear there's people today denying the Holocaust never happened. What would you say to those people?
I attended a lecture by he became General Felix L. Sparks in Washington. We went down there. Remember that? And one of those things he said, for you people who are saying that this never happened. tell us that who were there. And that was one sentence of his speech. And then we went over to the new museum that they had put up in Washington, D.C., the Holocaust Museum. But Felix says there were three things during the war that really affected him. The Battle of the Caves on Anzio, the Rippetsweiler deal, where all those men were captured and wounded, and Dachau. Now, I was with him on all those, although he never mentioned Aschaffenburg. And to me, I have to add one to his. Aschaffenburg, Germany, was, our company was designated to take Aschaffenburg. Now remember, the 60-millimeter mortars were taken, and now we got bazookas. Now here's these beautiful brick buildings, and in these buildings, they trained about 600 German officers. The next thing, we're selected to make the attack on one side of the camp there, and they were halted. So who do they call? Send the bazookas up. So here we go. And we were, to get at that, now we were on a little hill like this, grass hill. And then to really shoot into the building, you just had to go up a little bit and let it go. You remember I was telling you about the 10% of rear echelon men when we were short of men? Well, one of those men was firing my bazooka. I had just wired it and ready to tap him on the head to fire when I heard a gush of blood. Here this guy, a sniper, picked him off. That was the end of him. We were pinned down from 8:30 in the morning to about 3:30 in the afternoon until they were able to get some of our tanks to come up. And that's how we got out of there.
We're getting short on time, but some questions. Al, how did this experience at Dachau change you? I mean, before and after. I mean, I know you weren't there long, but going through something like that, and even the war itself, how did that change you as a person?
Well, I really, it's a difficult question to answer, because when I came home, I guess you could call me weird, huh? I refused to talk to anybody about anything. I was just, in fact, I was mentioning this to the fellow out there, Tina didn't even know I was a veteran in the war, because I never spoke about it. Where my family began to find out is after I retired and I started to go to reunions. And that's how it bloomed, it blossomed, you know. So, but as far as changing me, it's something that I will never forget, never forget. I wouldn't want to go through it again, although I wouldn't want to miss it either. It's just one of those things. So,
well, let me ask you a couple follow-up questions. Yeah. What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom means the ability to speak, to read, to converse like we are conversing now. I guess we're in a land of freedom. I don't know how to put it, to be honest with you. It's I don't know. I really.
Okay. Tell me about the American flag, what it means and represents to you as a veteran.
As a veteran, the American flag is a symbol of many, many, many men that have made the ultimate sacrifice. And it will always, always fly. Our country, in my opinion, right now is in the worst condition. I'm here 85 years, and in 85 years, I would say this country is in the worst shape that it's ever been during my lifetime, anyway. And I hope that somebody steps in and does something.
What should our country remember about World War II, Al?
Our country should remember, first of all, let me put the troops first. How many men gave their lives? You visit any cemetery over there, they're manicured to perfection. They're beautiful. Boy, but the lines are long and long. And you say, why, God, why? They're going, and here, you know, we're still fighting. So, but as far as the flag, that's a symbol that will last forever, I think. Because I don't think we people, when this thing with Iraq came on, I said to Tina, what are they doing? They don't have enough troops. They don't have enough armor. They're sending glorified automobiles over there, the Humvees, with no armor on them. And any one of these guys are being killed. Now, just being an old infantryman knew that. You know, and you mean to tell me these generals in the Pentagon didn't know that? That's ridiculous, ridiculous. And yet, you know, who pays the price? Who pays the price?
How? I'm just curious. How long were you at Dachau? A few hours? Or?
Yeah. We were just there from the late afternoon that night, and then I moved. K Company moved to a camp called Alak. You got to remember Dachau, where it was liberated, was the real Dachau. But then there was a lot of subsidiaries, little camps, and they were, I had a guard group in there of a woman's section of Alak. And this woman came out of the barracks. She had one arm. She said, this arm was taken by American artillery. She says, but I don't regret it. In fact, I'm very happy. But she started to tell me about the sanitation facilities. Now, this is a big unit of women. No sanitation facilities whatsoever. She says, I'd be embarrassed to take you into the barrack because you wouldn't be able to stand it. You know, and when you hear and see things like that, you know. But they were also, there was a fellow that I got to talk to at that camp, Alak. His name was Cy Peterson from the Chicago Tribune. And I tried to write and locate him, but I could never do it. But he was telling me, he looked good and healthy. He was telling me that even though he was a journalist, there he was a cook in that camp. So he was able to do pretty well by himself on food, you know.
One more question about the concentration camp. What was your job there? Just to look at stuff or to help people?
Well, don't forget now, we were way out and we came back in, you know.
Were there any survivors or were they all dead?
Oh no, there were some survivors, yeah.
What did they look like when you saw them?
Well, a lot of them tried to change into different clothes. But we had a little Frenchman with us that could smell a German person a mile away. And he would just go down and he would just point him out. And we just take him in, you know, as prisoners. But there were some still living. There were a lot of survivors. But the thing remains that it was hellish. That's all I can say. It's, I hope it, well, Kosovo was another one, wasn't it? It was,
Are you proud that you're a World War II veteran?
very much so. I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to do it again. But if I was called, I'd do it again. But
Have people thanked you for your service?
yes, there's a lot of people who have thanked me for my service, yes.
How does that make you feel?
Makes you feel like a celebrity. That's what I could say on that. But hey, it was something that had to be done. And you know, if you weren't in the service and you were outside and walking down the street, everybody would stare at you and want to know what happened. How come you're not in uniform? You know, everybody was in uniform. There wasn't that many 4Fs, I don't think. I don't know.
Al, at the end of my interviews, I have the veterans give me a salute into the camera.
Okay.
When I ask you, can you do that for me?
Sure,
Just give me 1 second.
sure.
Yeah, I want you to look right into the camera.
Okay.
Go ahead. Okay, excellent.